Hi, and welcome to week 8. We are halfway through the semester already. Um, so you can probably see the snow coming down behind me. It's Sunday afternoon here, and I think we'll have classes tomorrow. I don't think the snow will add up to much. Not that it matters for us, we're an online class, but my live classes have been canceled for the last few weeks here with the snow, so we're getting a little bit behind. But this is an online class, so here we can take the time to catch up whenever we need to. So, to get into this week's lecture, we're looking at the end of the 19th century, and Reconstruction has come to an end in the South, and new ways of suppressing Black Americans have come to the fore, including voter suppression, segregation, and lynching. And as you've read in your text, this was also an era of increased immigration and U.S. expansion into new territories like Cuba and the Philippines. It was also an era of scientific exploration and technological developments. So there's a lot going on. Things are beginning to change rapidly and will continue to do so into the 20th century. So I want you to think about, what does this mean to the practice of religion in America? I've assigned some primary sources to tie in with your readings and help you think about the topics of this week, which are universality and diversity. So, what do those words mean? Your textbook uses it a few times, uses both the words a few times, and I think they are important words to keep in mind at this time. What are the challenges to a Protestant Christian identity, and how are those challenges going to be addressed? The rise of the KKK during Reconstruction gives us some idea of the threat that white Anglo Americans felt and continue to feel. The second KKK will not come until the 1920s and will focus not only on Black Americans but also on Jews and Catholics. And the fact that membership in the KKK in the 1920s was well over 3 million members at its height, and that it was an open, visible organization, I think it shows just how widely popular this sentiment was. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves, and we'll talk more on that in the coming weeks. However, keep in mind this sentiment does not come out of nowhere and is developed in society and culture out of events that follow Reconstruction and American imperialism abroad. So I open your primary sources with those famous lines of Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." How is this belief that America means opportunity and freedom for huddled masses, how has that impacted the shape of religion in America? In the storybook version, the Pilgrims come to America aboard the Mayflower in search of religious freedom in 1620, and the Puritans soon follow for the same reason. And ever since these religious dissidents arrived at their shining city upon a hill, millions from around the world have done the same, coming to an America where they found a welcome melting pot in which everyone was free to practice his or her own faith. And so while some of America's early leaders were models of this kind of virtuous tolerance, remember that Jefferson intended for the separation of church and state, law as meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew, the Gentile, the Christian, and the Muslim, the Hindu, infidels of every denomination. And I'm quoting Jefferson there. But even though the leaders were kind of models for this tolerance, American attitudes were slow to change. The anti-Catholicism of America's Calvinist past found new voice in the 19th century. In the 1830s and 1840s, anti-Catholic violence broke out in the Northeast and elsewhere. In 1835, one incident was ignited by a speaking tour of Lyman Beecher, who published Plea for the West, and this was a book about a Catholic plot to take over the U.S. and impose Catholic rule. And this line of thinking continues It doesn't go away after this kind of upsurge in violence in the 1830s and 40s. It kind of continues to stay with us. In Philadelphia, anti-Catholic sentiment combined with the country's anti-immigrant mood fueled the Bible riots of 1844, in which houses were torched, 2 Catholic churches were destroyed, and at least 20 people were killed. And it was about at the same time that Joseph Smith founded a new American religion, Mormonism, and he soon met with the wrath of the mainstream Protestant majority. The religious community, his religious community, would be chased out of New York, Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, and eventually to Utah, where they finally settled. In 1832, a mob had tarred and feathered Smith, and in 1838, after a series of conflicts over land and religious tension, the Missouri governor had ordered that all Mormons be expelled from his state. 3 days later, Rogue militiamen massacred 17 church members, including children. And in 1844, a mob murdered Smith and his brother Hiram while they were jailed in Illinois. And at the end of the 1890s, the U.S. began seeing the first wave of anti-Semitism. And this happened just as the federal government began restricting immigration from Europe. And so while concentrations of Jews had lived in America since colonial times, they were largely tolerated and discriminated against in localized incidents. So it wasn't at the scale that we will eventually see as anti-Semitism grows. But this is just kind of the beginning. It's the 19th century. I just want to keep in mind some of these struggles that are going on within. But unlike other countries, the U.S. didn't succumb to all-out religious wars. And think about this for a few reasons. Is it because of the constitutional protections that we have? Is it because the United States was a country of immigrants and therefore diversity creates a type of tolerance? Did this immense diversity in of itself promote tolerance among all the religions? Perhaps religious pluralism inspires attitudes as a natural part of the religious environment, and so there's room for each religion to exist in America. What do you think about that, the idea of diversity creating or helping to create an environment of tolerance? So let's start by looking at some primary sources, and you'll look at Rabbi Isaac Wise and his correspondence. You don't have to read all the letters. There are over 500 letters, but you can open it up and see who he wrote to and the people that wrote to him, and maybe you'll see some names you recognize and you want to click on those and just take a look. Take some time to compare his correspondence, look at a few of them. And then you'll see Emanuel K. Love, who was a minister and leader in the Baptist Church from Savannah, Georgia. And he was pastor of one of the largest churches in the country and a prominent activist for Black civil rights, as well as anti-lynching laws. Pay close attention to the introduction of his book, History of the First African Baptist Church, and the mention of the importance of writing history. We've come across this before in different books that I've assigned you. In particular, African Americans were very cognizant of the fact that their story would not be told if they did not put it down in writing. And so take a look at that primary source. And at the same time that Lazarus was writing the huddled masses, the government was working to keep certain people out, in particular at this time Asians. The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882 and again in 1892. And I've included a primary document in your readings for you to see what the sentiment behind the acts were. And those sentiments only increased as we move into the 20th century. Antoinette Brown Blackwell, she was the first woman to be ordained as a minister in the United States. So I think she's important not only for this, but for her philosophy on science and how science relates to her faith or related to her faith. And you will also look at Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her criticism of religion and the actions that she took to remedy those criticisms. Dwight L. Moody is perhaps one of the greatest evangelical revivalists of the 19th century, and he's a very important figure to focus on as his ideas and beliefs are still with us today. So I have linked his sermons and a biography for you to read, so you can take a look at what Dwight Moody had to say, and keep in mind he was a very prominent figure, especially within the evangelical revivalist. He will he'll stay a primary focus for a few weeks to come as we move into the 20th century. Josiah Strong was a leader of the social gospel movement, calling for social justice and combating social evils. He supported missionary work so that all races could be improved and uplifted and thereby brought to Christ. And he was also one of the leading proponents of imperialism. He claimed that America, as the leading nation in the world, had a destiny to acquire new lands. This idea tied very well with manifest destiny. So take a look at Josiah Strong and think about also that this was kind of the high tide of missionary work where Americans were going abroad to preach to others and bring the word of Christ to the rest of the world. So at the same time, there's new religions that are continuing to emerge, and you'll look at Charles Russell and the Jehovah's Witnesses. You'll also take a look at Mary Baker Eddy and the Christian Science movement. And I have assigned a journal article for you to maybe help you better understand the kind of turn towards what has been called the occult. And this is an article on Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. And I want you to take a look at that and maybe help put things in perspective a little bit more. And then finally, you'll look at the Parliament of Religions, which took place in Chicago in 1893. And so this idea as a solution to religious tolerance really promoted an all-embracing universalism that envisioned a coming together of the great religions of the world. So the World Parliament of Religion was part of the Chicago World's Fair, and organizers called this a major interreligious conclave, quote unquote, the morning star of the 20th century. And I have provided a link so that you can listen to Swami Vivekananda's speech and listen to what he says about universality and tolerance and this kind of all-embracing, all-encompassing religion of the world. So look at your sources and readings for this week, and I want you to think upon and answer the following questions in a post to discussion 8. And I'll have these questions on the post so you can read them. The study of history is the study of change over time. How has religion in the United States changed since the Revolutionary era? Last week we saw that religious thought had an influence on the Civil War. Do you think that the Civil War affected religion? In what way? Do you think that Americans at the time believed that religion should change to meet society's needs? So thinking along this line will help prepare the way for us to explore the fundamentalist and the modernist split in 1925. So next time we meet, it will be after break and we'll have moved into the 20th century. So make sure that you submit your précis on American Christians and Islam by the 17th, and your midterm project is also due on the 17th. I hope you're enjoying diving into your family's past. I've added a discussion forum for you to post your finished products, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what everyone has come up with. I've also created a discussion forum for you to check in with me if you have any questions as the deadline comes a little bit closer. So I just wish everyone have a great week and have a great vacation, and I will see you after the break.